The wind howled like a wounded beast through the pine ridges of Wyoming territory, carrying with it the promise of a storm that would test even the hardiest souls. February of 1883 had been cruel, but this night threatened to surpass all others in its fury. Snow fell in thick curtains across the valley, obscuring the distant mountains until they were nothing more than gray phantoms against a darker sky. Ethan Callahan stood at the window of his ranch house, watching the storm gather strength. At 35, he cut an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with hands roughened by years of working cattle and breaking horses. His face, weathered by sun and wind, bore lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow, though the latter had etched itself more deeply in recent years. Dark hair, touched with premature silver at the temples, fell across his forehead as he leaned against the cold glass. The Double C Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of prime grazing land, making Ethan one of the wealthiest men in the territory. But wealth meant little when the rooms echoed with silence, when every corner held memories of voices that would never again fill the space. He'd built this empire with Margaret at his side, dreaming of the legacy they'd leave their children. Now, 3 years after the accident that took both wife and infant son, the ranch felt more like a monument to loss than a thriving enterprise. He turned from the window, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. The main room stretched before him, a testament to Margaret's touch despite his attempts to remove reminders of her presence. The stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling and sending shadows dancing across the log walls. Fine furniture shipped from back east sat arranged just as she'd left it, gathering dust he couldn't bring himself to disturb. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind rattled the windows in their frames, and snow began to pile against the door. Ethan poured himself a measure of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the firelight. The townsfolk whispered about him. He knew, the grieving widower who'd turned cold as the mountain winters, who'd withdrawn from society and thrown himself into work until his ranch hands barely recognized the man who'd once been quick with a joke and generous with his time. He was halfway through his drink when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Faint, almost lost in the wind's fury, but unmistakably human. Ethan set down his glass, head tilted, listening. There it came again, a pounding at the door, weak but desperate. No one with sense would be out in this weather. The nearest neighbor lived 5 miles away, and the town was twice that distance. Ethan hesitated, hand on his pistol. These were lawless times, and men had been robbed under the guise of seeking shelter. But the pounding came again, weaker this time, and something in its rhythm spoke of genuine distress rather than deception. He unbarred the heavy door, bracing himself against the wind that immediately tried to tear it from his grasp. Snow swirled into the room, and there on his doorstep stood a figure so unexpected that for a moment, Ethan could only stare. A woman, young from what he could tell, though her face was hidden beneath a sodden shawl. Her dress, once black, hung heavy with snow and ice. She swayed on her feet like a sapling in the wind. One small hand pressed against the doorframe for support. When she lifted her head to look at him, Ethan saw eyes the color of storm clouds, wide with exhaustion and something that might have been fear. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. I have nowhere else." She collapsed forward, and Ethan caught her before she could hit the floor. She weighed next to nothing, bird bones and wet fabric, trembling so violently he could feel it through his shirt. Without thinking, he swept her into his arms and kicked the door shut behind them. "Miss?" He carried her to the settee near the fire, noting how her skin had taken on an alarming bluish tinge. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, but she seemed beyond speech. Ethan's medical knowledge was limited to treating injured cattle and the occasional broken bone among his ranch hands. But he knew enough to recognize someone dangerously close to freezing. He grabbed a thick blanket from the cedar chest, wrapping it around her shoulders, then stoked the fire until it roared. The woman's shoes were little more than ruined leather, her stockings torn and bloody. How far had she walked in this storm? And why? No woman traveled alone in this territory without good reason or desperate circumstances. He heated water and made tea, adding a generous amount of sugar and a splash of whiskey. When he returned, she'd stopped shivering quite so violently, though her face remained pale as porcelain. Her hair, dark as wet earth, had come loose from its pins and fell in tangled waves around her shoulders. "Drink this," he said, helping her sit up enough to sip the tea. "Slowly now." She obeyed, thin fingers wrapping around the cup for warmth. Color gradually returned to her cheeks, and those storm-gray eyes focused on his face with surprising intensity. "Thank you," she managed after draining half the cup. "I'm sorry to impose. The storm came up so quickly, and No need for apologies," Ethan interrupted, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her voice. "Couldn't very well leave you out there to freeze. What's your name?" She hesitated, gaze dropping to the cup in her hands. "Does it matter?" "Reckon it might, considering you're in my home. Then you may call me Miss," she said finally. "Just Miss will do." Ethan frowned, but didn't press. In his experience, folks who wouldn't share their names usually had reasons that brought trouble. Still, looking at her, young, clearly genteel despite her current state, with those haunted eyes, he couldn't bring himself to demand answers. "Well then, Miss," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "You're welcome to shelter here until the storm passes. Are you hurt anywhere? Those feet look in bad shape." "I'm well enough," she said quickly, tucking her feet beneath her skirts. "I'm a widow, Mr. Callahan, Ethan Callahan." He noted how she'd volunteered her status without being asked, as if establishing propriety even in these circumstances. "And I'm sorry for your loss." Something flickered across her face, pain deeper than what could be explained by cold or exhaustion. "My husband's family. They felt I had no further claim on their charity. I was traveling to Cheyenne, hoping to find work, when the weather turned. Cheyenne's 30 miles east," Ethan said. "In this storm. On foot." "I know." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I know how foolish it was, but staying would have been worse." Questions crowded his mind. What kind of family cast out a widow into winter? Where were her belongings? Why did she look behind her when she thought he wasn't watching, as if expecting pursuit? But the exhaustion weighing down her shoulders stopped his interrogation. Tomorrow would be soon enough for answers. "You need food and proper rest," he said, rising. "I'll heat some stew. Then you can have the main bedroom. I'll bunk out in the barn with the hands." "Oh, I couldn't." She tried to stand, swayed, and sank back down. "The floor here by the fire would be more than sufficient. My mother would rise from her grave and box my ears if I let a lady sleep on the floor," Ethan said firmly. "You'll take the bed, and that's the end of it." While the stew warmed, he found himself studying her in glances. She sat perfectly still, back straight despite her obvious fatigue, hands folded in her lap. Everything about her spoke of proper upbringing, the way she held herself, the cultured tone beneath her exhaustion, the delicate features that would have been beautiful if not marked by hardship. Yet here she was, alone and desperate enough to walk into a blizzard rather than remain where she'd been. She ate the stew slowly, mechanically, as if forcing herself to swallow each bite. When she finished, Ethan showed her to the bedroom, Margaret's room, though he didn't think of it that way anymore. He'd moved his things out long ago, unable to sleep where her presence still lingered. "There are clean nightclothes in the wardrobe," he said, not mentioning they'd belonged to his wife. "I'll bank the fire and be gone before you wake." She stood in the doorway, looking small and lost. "Mr. Callahan, thank you. I know what this must look like. A strange woman appearing at your door. I promise I mean no harm or trouble." "Get some rest," he said gruffly, uncomfortable with the vulnerability in her voice. Storm should blow itself out by morning. As he gathered blankets and prepared to brave the cold walk to the barn, Ethan found himself pausing by the window again. The storm raged on, sealing them in a world of white and wind. In the flickering firelight, he could still see her silhouette through the bedroom doorway, a slender shadow against the wall, head bowed as if in prayer or despair. Something stirred in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name and didn't want to examine. He'd built walls around himself as solid as any winter shelter, keeping the world and its complications at bay. But tonight, the storm had brought more than snow to his doorstep. It had brought a mystery wrapped in wet wool and sorrow, a woman whose very presence seemed to challenge the frozen peace he'd made with solitude. Ethan pulled on his coat and stepped out into the night, welcoming the bite of wind against his face. The path to the barn was familiar even in the blinding snow, and soon he was bedded down in the hay beside his horses, listening to their comfortable sounds and the storm's fury above. Sleep eluded him. Instead, he found himself thinking about gray eyes and trembling hands, about the way she'd said, staying would have been worse, with such quiet certainty. Whatever had driven her into this storm, it was more than mere family cruelty. He'd seen fear before, knew its shapes and shadows. The woman, Miss, he reminded himself, carried it like a second skin. Come morning, he'd have decisions to make. The sensible course would be to take her to town as soon as the roads cleared, let her continue to Cheyenne and whatever life she hoped to build there. But something told him it wouldn't be that simple. Nothing that arrived in the middle of a Wyoming blizzard ever was. The wind howled through the rafters, and somewhere in the main house, a stranger slept in his dead wife's bed. Ethan closed his eyes and tried not to think about how the emptiness he'd grown accustomed to suddenly felt different, still present, but somehow less absolute, as if the storm had blown through more than just snow when it delivered her to his door. Dawn came reluctantly to the Wyoming territory, filtered through clouds still heavy with snow. Ethan woke to the sound of his lead ranch hand, Tom Morrison, stoking the barn's pot-bellied stove. His back ached from the night spent on hay bales, but it was a familiar discomfort, far preferable to the strange unease that had plagued his dreams. Hell of a storm, Tom observed, his weathered face creasing into deeper lines as he squinted out the barn door. Ain't seen the like since '79. You planning on telling me why you're bunking with the horses, boss? Ethan stood, brushing hay from his clothes. Got a visitor last night. Woman caught in the storm. Tom's eyebrows rose to his hairline. That's so? And you gave up your bed like a proper gentleman. Margaret would be proud. The mention of his late wife made Ethan's jaw tighten, but he said nothing. Tom had been with the Double C since the beginning, had earned the right to speak freely. Still, Ethan wasn't ready to discuss the stranger who'd appeared at his door like some wayward spirit. I'll need you and the boys to check the herd, he said instead. This snow's going to make feeding difficult. Might have to break open the emergency hay stores. Already sent Jake and Samuel out at first light. Tom replied, Rest of us will follow soon as we can see past our noses. You heading back to the house? Ethan nodded, pulling on his coat. The walk back seemed longer in daylight. Snow drifted up to his knees in places. The house stood solid against the white landscape, smoke curling from the chimney. Someone had stoked the fire. He entered quietly, stomping snow from his boots in the mudroom. The main room was empty, but the smell of coffee filled the air, along with something else. Bacon? He followed the aroma to the kitchen and stopped short in the doorway. The woman stood at his stove, Margaret's apron tied around her narrow waist. She'd pinned her hair up properly, revealing the elegant line of her neck, and color had returned to her cheeks. In daylight, he could see what darkness and exhaustion had hidden. She was younger than he'd thought, perhaps 25, with delicate features that spoke of genteel upbringing. But there was something else in the set of her shoulders, the careful way she moved, a wariness that reminded him of horses that had been handled roughly. She must have sensed his presence because she turned, spatula in hand, and offered a tentative smile. Good morning, Mr. Callahan. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to repay your kindness with breakfast. You didn't need to do that, Ethan said, uncomfortable with being served in his own home. You're a guest, an uninvited one, she corrected gently. Please, allow me this small gesture. The coffee's fresh, and I found eggs in your cold storage." He settled at the kitchen table, watching as she moved efficiently around the space. She'd found everything she needed without apparent difficulty, adapting to an unfamiliar kitchen with quiet competence. The breakfast she set before him was simple but perfectly prepared. Eggs over easy, crisp bacon, toasted bread with butter. "You cook well," he observed, tasting the eggs. "My mother insisted all her daughters learn domestic arts, regardless of our circumstances." She poured coffee for them both, then sat across from him, hands folded in her lap. "She said you never knew when life might require you to fend for yourself." Wise woman. Ethan studied her over his cup. "Speaking of circumstances, I don't even know what to call you besides Miss." She hesitated, fingers tightening around her coffee cup. In the morning light, he could see faint bruises on her wrists, old enough to be fading to yellow-green. His eyes narrowed, but he kept his voice neutral. "Clara," she said finally. "My name is Clara." "Well then, Clara. No last name." "Not anymore." The words carried a weight that discouraged further questions. She sipped her coffee, gaze fixed on the table. "Mr. Callahan, I know I've imposed terribly. As soon as the roads are passable, I'll continue to Cheyenne. If you could perhaps direct me to the nearest town where I might find temporary employment." "In this weather?" Ethan interrupted. "Snow's 3 feet deep and still falling. You wouldn't make it a mile." "Then I'll work for my keep until it clears," she said quickly. "I can cook, clean, mend. I'm stronger than I look." Ethan doubted that last claim, seeing how thin she was beneath the borrowed clothes. But her determination was clear, pride warring with desperation in those storm-gray eyes. "I've got to cook," he said. "Old Pete's been handling meals for the ranch hands for 10 years, and Mrs. Patterson comes from town twice a week for cleaning." Clara's shoulders sagged slightly. "Of course, I didn't mean to presume. But," Ethan continued, surprising himself, "Pete's been complaining about his rheumatism, and Mrs. Patterson's getting on in years. Might be they could use some help, just until the weather clears. Mind you." The relief that flashed across her face made something twist in his chest. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret." "No promises," he said gruffly. "Just work, and you'll take proper wages, not charity." She opened her mouth to protest, then seemed to think better of it. "As you wish." They finished breakfast in silence, but it wasn't entirely uncomfortable. Ethan found himself aware of small things: the delicate way she held her cup, the straight line of her spine, how she unconsciously rubbed her wrists when she thought he wasn't looking. Those bruises troubled him more than he cared to admit. After breakfast, Clara insisted on washing up despite his protests. Ethan retreated to his study to work on the ranch ledgers, but concentration eluded him. Through the open door, he could hear her moving about, humming softly under her breath. The sound was so unexpectedly domestic, so reminiscent of better times, that he had to close the door against it. By afternoon, she'd transformed the kitchen, not just cleaned it, but somehow made it welcoming again in a way it hadn't been since Margaret's death. Fresh bread cooled on the counter, and she'd found his mother's old curtains in storage, washed and hung them to brighten the windows. When Pete arrived to start dinner for the hands, he found Clara already preparing a stew that had him sampling and nodding approval. "You didn't say nothing about hiring new help," Pete accused when Ethan came to investigate the commotion. "Temporary arrangement." Ethan replied, "Clara's staying until the weather breaks." Pete, 60 if he was a day and cantankerous as a bear with a sore tooth, studied Clara with shrewd eyes. "She cooks better than me," he announced. "But don't go getting ideas. I ain't ready for the rocking chair yet." "Wouldn't dream of it," Clara assured him solemnly. "But perhaps you could teach me how you make biscuits for 20 men? I've only ever cooked for a small household." Pete's expression softened marginally. "Suppose I could do that, if you're staying a spell." Ethan left them to it, but found himself drawn back to the kitchen throughout the day. Clara had a gift for putting people at ease. Even Tom, who distrusted most folks on principle, was soon sharing stories of his childhood in Texas while she kneaded bread dough. That evening, after the hands had been fed and retired to the bunkhouse, Ethan found Clara in the main room, darning a pair of socks by firelight. She'd changed back into her own dress, now clean and mended, though the fabric was worn thin in places. "Those aren't mine," he said, indicating the socks. "Jake's," she replied without looking up. "He mentioned they needed mending. I hope you don't mind." Ethan settled in his chair across from her. "You don't need to mend the men's clothes. I like to keep my hands busy." She tied off a thread, examined her work critically. "Idle hands lead to idle thoughts," my mother used to say. "And what thoughts are you avoiding, Clara?" Her hand stilled. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly, he had to strain to hear. "Have you ever done something necessary but terrible, Mr. Callahan? Something that saved you but damned you all the same?" The question hit too close to home. Ethan thought of the accident, the split-second decision to grab the reins that had saved him but failed to save Margaret and their son. "Yes," he said simply. She looked up then, those gray eyes holding depths of pain that matched his own. "Then you understand why some thoughts are better left unexamined." They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the wind had calmed, but snow still fell steadily. The house felt different with her in it, less empty, but somehow more dangerous too. Ethan had grown comfortable in his isolation, wrapped grief around himself like armor. Clara's presence threatened that careful construction, her quiet competence and hidden sorrow creating cracks in walls he'd thought impermeable. "I should retire," she said eventually, setting aside the mending. "Thank you again for your kindness. Mr. Callahan?" "Ethan," he said impulsively. "If you're going to be staying a while, might as well use my given name." A small smile touched her lips, transforming her face. "Then good night, Ethan." After she'd gone, he sat staring into the fire, trying to make sense of the day. He'd woken expecting to send a stranger on her way, and instead had offered her employment. Worse, he found himself curious about her story, about the bruises and the sorrow and the steel beneath her gentle manner. The smart thing would be to maintain distance, treat her like any other temporary hired help. But when had he ever done the smart thing where women were concerned? Margaret had been the daughter of his father's sworn enemy, and he'd married her anyway. That had turned out well enough, until fate intervened. No, he told himself firmly. Clara was a temporary inconvenience. Nothing more. The weather would clear, she'd move on to Cheyenne, and his life would return to its predictable rhythms. He just had to keep his distance until then. But as he made his way to his room, his own room tonight, not the barn, he passed the kitchen and saw the bread she'd made, covered with a clean cloth for morning. Such a simple thing, fresh bread waiting for breakfast. Such a dangerous thing, the comfort of domestic care. Ethan closed his door firmly behind him and tried not to think about gray eyes and gentle hands, about the way she'd said his name like a gift she wasn't sure she deserved. Outside, the snow continued to fall, sealing them together in a world reduced to the boundaries of the Double C Ranch. He had a feeling that by the time it melted, nothing would be quite the same. The snow continued for 3 more days, transforming the Double C Ranch into an island of white isolation. By the 4th morning, when weak sunlight finally broke through the clouds, the drifts stood higher than a man's head in places, effectively sealing the ranch from the outside world. Ethan stood on the porch, surveying the pristine landscape, beautiful and deadly in equal measure, like so many things in the territory. Behind him, the door opened, and Clara stepped out carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might want this," she said, offering him a cup. He accepted it with a nod, noting how she'd learned his preferences. Black, no sugar, strong enough to float a horseshoe. They stood side by side, breath misting in the cold air, watching as Tom and the hands worked to clear paths between the buildings. "I've never seen snow like this," Clara said softly. "In Kansas, We had storms, but nothing that could swallow the world so completely. Wyoming winters don't forgive. Ethan replied, "Lost 2 men my first year here. They thought they could make it to town between storms." He paused, remembering. "Found them come spring, not half a mile from the ranch road." Clara shivered, pulling her shawl tighter. She'd fashioned it from an old blanket, displaying the practical ingenuity he'd come to expect from her. "How long before the road's clear?" "Could be weeks. Depends on if we get more snow." He glanced at her. "Having second thoughts about staying?" "No." The word came quickly, firmly. "I have nowhere else to go. Remember?" The matter-of-fact way she said it twisted something inside him. He'd been watching her these past days, noting the way she startled at sudden sounds, how she always positioned herself with her back to a wall and a clear path to the door. Whatever had driven her from Kansas, it was more than an uncharitable family. "Clara," he began, then stopped. What right did he have to pry into her secrets when he guarded his own so carefully? "You want to know why I really left," she said, reading his hesitation. "Why a widow would walk into a blizzard rather than accept her husband's family's protection. Only if you want to tell it." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, as if recounting someone else's story. "They wanted me to marry again. My late husband's brother said it was fitting, keeping things in the family, when I refused." She touched her wrist unconsciously, where the bruises were fading. "They decided to be persuasive." Anger, hot and sudden, flared in Ethan's chest. "They hurt you." "Nothing I couldn't endure. But when they locked me in the root cellar for 2 days to consider my options, I knew worse was coming. So when they finally let me out, I pretended to agree. That night, I took what little money I had hidden and ran. In a blizzard, with no coat worthy of the name and shoes that wouldn't keep out rain, let alone snow. Better to die free than live in a cage." Clara said simply, "Wouldn't you make the same choice?" Ethan thought of his own cage, built from grief and guilt, but no less confining. "I suppose I would." The conversation might have continued, but Jake came running around the corner of the barn, face flushed with excitement. "Boss, we got trouble with the horses. That new mare's caught in the fence, and she's panicking something fierce." Ethan set down his coffee and followed Jake, Clara trailing behind despite his gesture for her to stay. The mare, a beautiful sorrel he'd bought just before winter, had somehow gotten her leg tangled in loose fencing wire. She thrashed wildly, eyes rolling white with terror, making the situation worse with every movement. "Easy, girl," Ethan crooned, approaching slowly. But the mare was beyond hearing, lost in panic. Blood already stained the snow where the wire cut deep. "She's going to break her leg," Tom said grimly, reaching for his rifle. "Might be kinder to—" "No." Clara stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Let me try." "Ma'am, that's a wild horse," Jake protested. "She's liable to kick your head in." But Clara was already moving, slow and deliberate, humming low in her throat. The tune was haunting, almost a lullaby, and somehow it cut through the mare's panic. The thrashing slowed, then stopped, the horse's ears swiveling toward this new sound. "That's it," Clara murmured, inching closer. "You're frightened, aren't you? But we're going to help. Just be still, sweet girl. Be still." Ethan held his breath as Clara reached the mare, still humming that strange, soothing melody, with infinite care. She laid her hand on the horse's neck, never stopping the wordless song. The mare trembled, but didn't pull away. "Now, Ethan," Clara said softly, "cut the wire while I keep her calm." He moved quickly, sawing through the tangled wire with his knife. The mare flinched, but Clara's hand never left her neck. The humming never ceased. In moments, the horse was free, leg bleeding but not broken. "I'll be damned," Tom muttered. "Pardon the language, ma'am, but I ain't never seen nothing like that." Clara stepped back as Ethan examined the wound. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "My father bred horses before." She trailed off, face closing. Before, I spent my childhood in stables. Sometimes a gentle touch works better than force. Ethan cleaned and bandaged the mare's leg, aware of Clara watching. There was more to her story. Layers of loss she hadn't revealed. Horse breeding was a gentleman's occupation, speaking of wealth and standing. How had a woman of such background ended up married into a family that would lock her in a cellar? That evening, as had become their custom, they sat by the fire after dinner. Clara worked on a quilt she'd started from fabric scraps, while Ethan pretended to read a week-old newspaper. In truth, he found himself watching her more than the words, fascinated by the delicate precision of her stitches. "You never speak of your wife," Clara said suddenly, not looking up from her work. Ethan's hands tightened on the newspaper. "Not much to say. There's everything to say," she corrected gently. "I see her everywhere in this house. In the rose pattern on the good china, the books of poetry on the shelf, the way the furniture is arranged just so." She had beautiful taste. Margaret. The name felt rusty on his tongue. Her name was Margaret. And yes, she made this place a home instead of just a house. "How long were you married?" 6 years. She died 3 winters past. Accident with the wagon on the mountain road." He set the paper aside, unable to maintain the pretense of reading. "Our son, too. He was barely 8 months old." Clara's hands stilled. "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. It was my fault." The words came without intention, pulled out by something in her quiet sympathy. "I was driving, saw the ice too late, managed to jump clear, but the wagon, it went over the edge, 40-foot drop." "That's not fault," Clara said firmly. "That's tragedy. There's a difference." "Is there?" "I walked away without a scratch. They didn't walk away at all." Clara set aside her quilting and moved to kneel beside his chair, looking up at him with those grave gray eyes. "You think surviving makes you guilty? That grief is somehow payment for being the one who lived? Doesn't it?" "No." She reached out, hesitated, then laid her hand over his. "I used to think that too. When my father lost everything in bad investments and took his own life. When my mother died of shame and a broken heart. When I found myself married to a man who—" She stopped, drew a breath. "Survival isn't a sin. Ethan, sometimes it's the hardest burden of all." Her hand was small and warm on his, calloused from work but still gentle. Ethan found himself turning his palm up, threading his fingers through hers. The contact was electric, sending warmth up his arm and straight to his chest. "Clara," he said, voice rough. She pulled away, color high in her cheeks. "I should check on the mare, make sure her bandage is holding. It's dark and cold. I'll take a lantern." She was already moving, grabbing her shawl. "I won't be long." Ethan let her go, knowing she needed distance as much as he did. The space between them had been shrinking daily, worn away by shared meals and quiet evenings, by small kindnesses and smaller revelations. He'd told her things he hadn't spoken of to anyone, and she'd offered pieces of her own story in return. It was dangerous, this growing intimacy. She was running from something, and he was hiding from everything. Neither of them had any business complicating an already impossible situation. Come spring, she would leave, and he would return to his self-imposed isolation. That was the only sensible outcome, but sensible had never been his strong suit, as Margaret could have testified. And when Clara returned from the barn, cheeks pink with cold and eyes bright, reporting that the mare was healing well, Ethan found himself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in 3 years. "You're good for this place," he said impulsively. "The men respect you, the animals trust you. Even Pete admitted your cornbread is better than his, and that's saying something." Clara ducked her head, but he caught her pleased smile. "It's easy to be useful when people let you. Your ranch, your men, they're good people. Ethan, they deserve care. And what do you deserve?" "Clara." She met his eyes then, and for a moment, all her defenses dropped. He saw loneliness to match his own, fear that ran bone deep, and underneath it all, a yearning for something she didn't dare name, "I used to know," she whispered. "Now I'm not sure I deserve anything at all." Before he could respond, she bid him good night and retreated to her room. Ethan sat alone by the dying fire, her words echoing in the silence. He understood that feeling too well, the sense that happiness was for other people, those who hadn't failed in the fundamental duty of keeping loved ones safe. But watching Clara these past days, seeing her gentle strength and quiet courage, something long frozen had begun to thaw inside him. She made him want things he'd thought buried with Margaret. Not replacement. Nothing could do that, but perhaps the possibility of moving forward rather than merely existing. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. More snow coming. From the feel of it, more days locked together in this sanctuary that was becoming something else, something neither of them had planned for. Ethan banked the fire and headed for bed, trying not to think about how natural it felt to have Clara under his roof, how right she looked in his kitchen, his parlor, his life. Spring would come eventually. The snow would melt, the roads would clear, and she would leave for Cheyenne and a new life. He would do nothing to prevent it, nothing to complicate her escape from whatever demons pursued her. But tonight, with winter sealing them in and her presence warming corners of the house he'd forgotten were cold, Ethan allowed himself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if she stayed. The wolves came with the new moon, their howls echoing across the frozen valley like spirits of the damned. Ethan woke to the sound, instantly alert. He'd lost cattle to wolf packs before, but never this early in the season. Desperation must be driving them down from the high country. He dressed quickly and found Tom already in the kitchen, loading his rifle. Clara stood by the stove, face pale but composed, coffee ready despite the early hour. "How many?" Ethan asked, checking his own weapon. "Hard to say. Jake spotted at least 6 circling the east pasture where we got the yearlings penned." Tom's weathered face was grim. "They're bold, coming this close to the buildings. The storm's got them starving." Ethan said, "We'll need to post watches, move the most vulnerable stock closer to the barn." "I can help," Clara offered quietly. "I know how to shoot." Both men turned to stare at her. She lifted her chin, meeting their surprise with steady determination. "My father taught me, said a woman should know how to protect herself and what's hers." "This ain't target practice, ma'am," Tom warned. "Wolves are cunning, and desperate ones are dangerous." "So are desperate people," Clara replied. "I won't hide inside while others risk themselves protecting the ranch." Ethan studied her for a long moment, seeing again that steel beneath her gentle exterior. "Can you handle a Winchester? Better than a pistol. The weight helps with the recoil." He made his decision. "Tom, take Jake and Samuel to the east pasture. I'll take Clara and check the barn and closer paddocks. We'll drive them off if we can. Put them down if we must." The night was bitter cold, stars sharp as glass in the clear sky. Clara had changed into a pair of Margaret's old riding clothes, split skirt and heavy coat that Ethan had wordlessly provided. She carried the rifle with easy familiarity, no fumbling or uncertainty in her grip. They moved through the snow in silence, breath clouding in the frigid air. The barn was secure, horses restless but unharmed. But as they approached the paddock where the milk cows were kept, Ethan saw glowing eyes reflecting their lantern light. "There," he whispered, raising his rifle. The wolves were thin, ribs showing even through winter coats. 5 of them, circling the fence where the cows huddled together in terror. The pack leader, a massive gray male, turned toward them with lips pulled back from yellowed fangs. "Take the one on the left," Ethan murmured. "On 3, 1, 2. The rifles cracked in unison. Ethan's shot took the leader cleanly, dropping him mid-stride. Clara's bullet found its mark too, the wolf on the left crumpling into the snow. The other 3 scattered, disappearing into the darkness like smoke. "Good shot," Ethan said, impressed despite himself. Clara lowered her rifle, hands trembling now that the moment had passed. "I've never killed anything larger than a rabbit before. You did what was necessary." He moved to examine the dead wolves, confirming what he'd suspected. Look at them. Nothing but skin and bones. The deer must be scarce higher up. They dragged the carcasses away from the paddock, the work grim but necessary. Clara didn't complain, though Ethan could see the task disturbed her. Death was part of ranch life, but that didn't make it easier for those unaccustomed to its harsh realities. By the time they returned to the house, dawn was breaking pale and cold across the mountains. Tom and the others had successfully driven off their pack, though not before losing a yearling calf. Could have been worse, Tom said philosophically. That lady of yours is a fair shot, boss. Dropped her wolf clean as you please. I'm not his lady, Clara said quietly, color rising in her cheeks. Figure of speech, ma'am, Tom replied, but his knowing look made Ethan uncomfortable. The men dispersed to their regular duties, leaving Ethan and Clara alone in the kitchen. She busied herself making breakfast, but he could see the morning's events weighed on her. You all right? He asked. Yes. She cracked eggs into a pan, not meeting his eyes. It's just, everything dies out here, doesn't it? The weak, the slow, the unlucky. There's no mercy in this land. Not much. Ethan agreed. But there's beauty too. Come spring, these hills will be green as emeralds, wildflowers everywhere you look, new calves, fresh starts. He paused, watching her work. Life finds a way, even here. She smiled slightly. You're more poet than you let on. Ethan Callahan. Margaret used to say the same thing. The mention of his late wife came easier now. No longer a knife to the gut, but merely an old ache. She loved spring on the ranch, said it was like watching the world be born again. Clara served the eggs and bacon, pouring coffee for them both. They ate in companionable silence, the early morning adventure having created a new bond between them. She'd stood beside him in danger, proven herself capable and brave. It was getting harder to think of her as temporary help. That afternoon, while Clara helped Pete prepare dinner for the hands, a lone rider approached the ranch. Ethan recognized him from town, Josiah Winters, who ran the general store and served as informal postmaster. Hell of a time to be traveling, Josiah. Ethan greeted him. Couldn't be helped, the older man replied, accepting the cup of coffee Ethan offered. Got a wire asking about a woman might have passed this way. Widow, name of Clara Hartley. There's people looking for her. Ethan kept his face carefully neutral. What kind of people? The kind offering a reward, $50 for information on her whereabouts. Josiah's eyes were shrewd. Seems she left Kansas in a hurry. Family wants her back for her own good, they say. Haven't seen any widows wandering through, Ethan said evenly. Storm would have killed anyone fool enough to be traveling. That's what I figured. Josiah finished his coffee. Still, thought I'd check. You hear anything? There's that reward to consider. After Josiah left, Ethan found Clara in the barn, brushing down the mare she'd helped save. Her face was pale, hands shaking as they moved over the horse's coat. You heard, he said. It wasn't a question. Hartley was my married name, she said dully. I suppose it was foolish to think they wouldn't follow. $50 is a lot of money. Not to me. She turned then, eyes bright with unshed tears. You don't understand. My brother-in-law, Jonathan Hartley. He's not just anyone. He has money, influence. He owns half the county back in Kansas. If he wants me found, he won't find you here. Ethan, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you. You're under my protection now. And I don't sell out people under my roof. Not for $50. Not for $500. She dropped the brush and crossed to him, stopping just short of touching. Why? You barely know me. I could be lying about everything. Are you? No. The word was barely a whisper. But I've brought trouble to your door. That's poor repayment for kindness. Let me worry about that. He wanted to reach for her, offer comfort, but held back. Question is, what do you want to do? I can get you to Cheyenne once the road's clear, help you disappear proper. Or you stay. Let them come if they dare. This is my land, my ranch. No one takes what's mine. I'm not yours, Clara said. But there was something in her voice that made the words a question rather than a statement. No, Ethan agreed. But you could be. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara's breath caught, and for a moment, they stood frozen, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then she stepped into his arms. The kiss was desperate, hungry, full of loneliness and fear and growing need. Ethan pulled her against him, feeling how perfectly she fit, how right this felt despite all the reasons it shouldn't. She tasted of coffee and courage, and when she made a small sound against his mouth, he was lost. But Clara was the one who pulled back, pressing her hand to his chest. We can't. I'm not free to want this. Your husband is dead. In body, yes, but his shadow, his family. She shook her head. You don't know what you're risking. I know exactly what I'm risking, Ethan said roughly. The question is whether you're worth it. She looked up at him, tears finally spilling over. I don't know. I honestly don't know anymore. He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing away the tears. Then stay until you figure it out. The roads won't clear for weeks yet. That's time enough to decide. And if they come before then they'll learn what kind of man I am when someone threatens what I'm protecting. Clara studied his face, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. All right, I'll stay. But Ethan, be careful. The Hartley family doesn't forgive debts, and they consider me a very large debt. That evening, Ethan called Tom aside and explained the situation. The foreman's face darkened as he listened. So, we got trouble coming, Tom said. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, I want the men alert. Anyone comes asking about Clara, they haven't seen her. The boys won't talk. Most of them have their own reasons for being this far from anywhere. Tom paused. She worth the fight that's coming? Ethan thought of Clara facing down the wolves, of her gentle hands with the horses, of the way she'd brought warmth back to his frozen life. Yeah, she's worth it. Tom nodded. Then we'd best be ready. I'll talk to the boys. Set up a watch schedule. Anyone wants to take her back to Kansas will have to go through the Double C first. As Tom walked away, Ethan stood in the barn doorway, looking out at his land, somewhere beyond those mountains. Trouble was stirring. The Hartley family wouldn't give up easily, not if they'd already put out word and reward money. But as he watched Clara through the kitchen window, laughing at something Pete said, flour dusting her cheek, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years, the fierce need to protect someone who mattered. He'd failed Margaret, failed their son. He wouldn't fail Clara. Whatever came with the spring thaw, whatever price he had to pay, she would be safe. He'd make sure of it, even if it cost him everything. The night Clara finally broke, the stars were hidden behind clouds that promised more snow. Ethan had noticed her growing quieter throughout the day, her usual grace replaced by jerky, nervous movements. At dinner, she'd barely touched her food, and twice he'd caught her staring at nothing, lost in some internal horror. He found her in the parlor after the men had retired, sitting rigidly in the chair by the dying fire. Her hands were clenched in her lap, knuckles white with strain. When he approached, she didn't acknowledge him, just continued staring at the embers. Clara? He knelt beside her chair, concerned by her pallor. What's wrong? I killed him. The words came out flat, emotionless. I need you to know that before whatever happens between us goes any further, I killed my husband. Ethan had suspected something like this, given her fear and the family's determination to find her. But hearing it stated so baldly still sent a chill through him. Tell me, he said simply. Clara's laugh was bitter. Where do I start? With the charming man who courted me after father died, who promised to care for mother and me when we had nothing left? Or should I skip to the monster he became once the wedding vows were spoken? Start wherever you need to. She drew a shuddering breath. Theodore Hartley owned the Hartley Mining Company. Half the men in the county worked for him, lived in his company houses, bought from his company store. He was like a king in his little kingdom, and kings don't like being told no. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The first time he struck me was our wedding night. I'd been reluctant, frightened. He said a wife's duty was obedience and showed me what happened when I failed in that duty. Ethan's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice gentle. Go on. It got worse after Mother died. Without her to visit, I was alone in that house with him and his brother Jonathan. They're cut from the same cloth, those two cruel men who see others as possessions. Clara's hand unconsciously went to her throat. Theodore would hurt me for any infraction. Dinner late, house not clean enough, looking at him wrong. And when I couldn't give him a son... She stopped, breathing hard. Ethan waited, knowing she needed to tell this at her own pace. I lost 3 babies, she continued, voice breaking. Each time, he blamed me, said I was defective, useless. The beatings got worse, and then I got pregnant again. 4 months along, further than I'd ever carried before. I thought maybe this time. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly. He came home drunk from the mine. There'd been an accident. Men trapped in a shaft he'd refused to properly shore up because it cost too much. 3 died. Their widows had come to the house, begging for compensation. He'd had them thrown out. I made the mistake of suggesting he help them. Just a small amount. I said, those women had children to feed. Her laugh was harsh. He said if I cared so much about other people's brats, maybe I didn't deserve my own. Ethan's blood ran cold. Clara, he pushed me down the stairs. The words came out in a rush. Deliberate, calculated. I remember falling, trying to protect my belly, the pain when I hit the bottom. I lost the baby that night, bleeding on the kitchen floor while he ate his dinner at the table above me. Tears streamed down her face now, but her voice remained steady. Something died in me along with that child. All the fear, all the submission, it just burned away. I started planning, careful, patient. I knew I'd only get one chance. 3 weeks later, he came at me again, drunk, angry about something at the mine, but this time, I was ready. When he grabbed me in the kitchen, I had the butcher knife hidden in my skirts. When he raised his fist, she mimed a swift upward motion. I didn't hesitate, didn't stop until I was sure he'd never hurt anyone again. The room fell silent except for the pop of embers in the fireplace. Ethan remained kneeling beside her chair, processing the horror of what she'd endured. His brother found me the next morning. Clara continued, still sitting there, covered in blood, the knife in my hand. Theodore was very dead. Jonathan wanted to have me hanged immediately, but the sheriff insisted on an investigation. That's when things got complicated. How so? Some of the miners' wives spoke up about the beatings they'd witnessed, the bruises I'd tried to hide. The doctor confirmed I'd recently lost a child, that my injuries were consistent with a fall or a push. The sheriff started asking uncomfortable questions about Theodore's business practices, his treatment of workers. Clara met Ethan's eyes for the first time since beginning her story. Jonathan couldn't afford that scrutiny, so he made a deal. He'd claim Theodore died in an accident if I disappeared, left the state, never came back, never spoke of what happened. I agreed. What choice did I have? But I should have known he'd never let it rest. I knew too much about the family business, the corners cut, the bribes paid, and I'd killed his brother, in his mind. That debt can only be paid one way. So you ran, as far and fast as I could, but $50 is a lot of money to desperate people. Someone will talk eventually. And when Jonathan finds me, she shuddered. He'll make what Theodore did look like kindness. Ethan rose from his knees, pacing to the fireplace as rage coursed through him. Not at Clara, never at her, but at the men who'd driven her to such desperation. He understood now the weight she carried, the guilt and fear that shadowed her eyes. You did what you had to do, he said finally. No jury in the world would convict you, knowing the truth. Do you think that matters? The Hartleys own the judges back in Kansas, own the law itself. Justice is what they say it is. Not here. Ethan turned to face her. Decision crystallizing. Not on my land. You defended yourself against a man who would have killed you eventually. That's not murder, that's survival. I still killed him, Clara said quietly. I still have his blood on my hands. Can you honestly say that doesn't change how you see me? Ethan crossed back to her, gently taking those hands in his. What I see is a woman who found courage when she had nothing left to lose, who survived hell and still has kindness enough to doctor wounded horses and mend cowboy socks. You're not defined by the worst thing that ever happened to you. Clara. Aren't I? She searched his face. When you look at me, you don't see a killer. I see the woman who's brought my house back to life, who makes Tom Morrison smile and has Pete teaching her his secret biscuit recipe. I see someone who faced down wolves to protect what matters. He squeezed her hands. I see a survivor who deserves better than running forever. Clara's composure finally cracked completely. She fell forward into his arms, sobbing as 3 years of fear and guilt poured out. Ethan held her, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring meaningless comforts. He thought of his own guilt, the weight of surviving when loved ones hadn't, but this was different. Clara had fought for her life against a monster. The fact that she still felt guilt over it only proved her humanity. When her tears finally slowed, he pulled back enough to see her face. You're safe here. I swear it on Margaret's grave. Jonathan Hartley wants you. He'll have to go through me and every man on this ranch. You can't fight the whole world for me, Clara protested weakly. Watch me. He cupped her face, thumb brushing away tear tracks. You're not alone anymore. You have a place here for as long as you want it. What if I want it forever? The question slipped out, barely audible. Ethan's heart clenched. Then forever is what you'll have. He kissed her then, slow and gentle, trying to pour all his fierce protectiveness into the contact. When they parted, something had shifted between them. The last walls were down, secrets laid bare. Whatever came next, they would face it together. I should tell the men, Clara said. They deserve to know what they're risking by keeping silent. Tomorrow, Ethan agreed. They won't care. Half of them are running from something themselves. They understand second chances. They sat together by the fire until it died to ashes, not speaking, just holding on. Outside, snow began to fall again, adding another layer to their winter fortress. But Ethan knew spring would come eventually, and with it, a reckoning. Jonathan Hartley sounded like a man who didn't forgive or forget. He'd come for Clara, either himself or through hired men, and when he did, he'd find the Double C Ranch ready for war. Because Ethan had meant what he said, Clara had suffered enough. She'd paid for her freedom in blood and pain and 3 lost children. No more running, he murmured against her hair. Whatever comes, we face it here. Clara nodded against his chest. Together? Together. They finally retired to their separate rooms, propriety maintained despite the intimacy of shared secrets. But Ethan lay awake long into the night, planning. Come morning, he'd send word to Judge Harrison in Cheyenne, a fair man who owed him a favor. He'd hire extra men, good with guns and loyal to the brand. He'd turn the Double C into a fortress if necessary. Because Clara was right about one thing, she was his now, in all the ways that mattered. And Ethan Callahan protected what was his, no matter the cost. Theodore Hartley had learned that lesson too late. If Jonathan was smart, he'd stay in Kansas and count himself lucky to be rid of her. But something told Ethan that Jonathan wasn't smart. Men who confused cruelty with strength rarely were. So let him come. With his money and his threats and his hired guns, he'd find the Wyoming Territory a less hospitable place than Kansas for his brand of justice. The snow continued to fall, sealing them in for another day, another night. One more barrier between Clara's past and her future. Ethan closed his eyes, hearing her words echo. What if I want it forever? Forever sounded just about right. The thaw came suddenly, as it often did in Wyoming. One day the world was locked in ice, the next, water dripped from every surface and the snow began its slow retreat. Ethan stood on the porch, watching rivulets carve channels through the remaining drifts, and knew their time of isolation was ending. Clara joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She'd taken to wearing Margaret's clothes regularly now. Practical divided skirts and warm shirt-waists that suited her far better than the threadbare dress she'd arrived in. The change was more than clothing. She moved with confidence now, no longer glancing over her shoulder every few minutes. Tom says the road to town might be passable by week's end, she said quietly. Most likely. Ethan accepted his coffee, noting the tension in her shoulders. They'd grown comfortable in their snowbound world, but reality was seeping back with the meltwater. Are you ready? I'll never be ready, but I'm tired of being afraid. She leaned against the porch rail, face turned to the warming sun. Whatever happens, I want you to know these weeks they've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? Hope. She smiled, soft and real. I'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up without dread, to look forward instead of back. Before Ethan could respond, Jake came running from the direction of the road, face flushed with exertion. Boss, rider coming in fast from town! Ethan's hand went to his sidearm automatically, but as the rider drew closer, he recognized the familiar figure of Judge Harrison's clerk, young Matthew Pearson. The boy, barely 20 and green as spring grass, pulled up in a spray of mud and melting snow. Mr. Callahan, Matthew panted, dismounting gracelessly. Judge Harrison sent me, said it was urgent. Catch your breath. Boy! Ethan led him inside, Clara following. Once Matthew had a cup of coffee and a moment to compose himself, Ethan prompted, What's so urgent it couldn't wait for better roads? There's men in Cheyenne asking questions about a woman. Widow from Kansas. They're offering $100 now for information. Matthew's eyes darted to Clara, then away. Judge Harrison thought you should know. These aren't nice men. Mr. Callahan. One of them, man named Briggs, has a reputation. What kind of reputation? Though Ethan suspected he knew. The kind that ends with people disappearing. He's wanted in 3 territories, but nobody can ever prove anything. Matthew swallowed hard. Judge wanted me to tell you he's prepared to help however he can. Says he remembers what you did for his daughter, and debts should be paid. Ethan felt Clara stiffen beside him. He placed a steady hand on her back, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. How many men? 4 that we know of, Briggs and 3 others. They've been making the rounds of all the ranches east of here. Word is they'll head this direction once the road's clear. Then we'd best be ready. Ethan turned to Clara. Go find Tom. Tell him we need a meeting with all the hands. It's time everyone knew what's coming. Clara nodded and left without argument. Matthew watched her go with obvious curiosity, but wisely held his questions. Ethan penned a quick note for the judge, outlining the situation and his intentions. Take this back to Judge Harrison, he instructed. Tell him I may need that favor sooner than expected. And Matthew, ride careful. Men like Briggs don't appreciate interference. After the clerk departed, Ethan found his entire crew assembled in the main room. 8 men in all, rough-hewn and weather-beaten, each with their own reasons for choosing life on an isolated ranch. They listened in silence as Clara told her story, voice steady despite the personal nature of the tale. When she finished, old Pete was the first to speak. So some bastard, pardon my language, ma'am, thinks he can come here and take you back to Kansas. That appears to be his intention, Clara said quietly. Well, he can think again. Pete's grizzled face was set in stubborn lines. You're double C now. We don't give up our own. A chorus of agreement rose from the other men. Tom stepped forward, spokesman for the group. Boss, you want us to ford up here or meet them on the road? Neither. Ethan had been thinking about this since Matthew's arrival. I'm going to Cheyenne. Judge Harrison can marry Clara and me. Make it legal. A husband can't be forced to give up his wife, no matter what her kin want. The room went silent. Clara's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she set it down with shaking hands. Ethan, you can't. I won't let you tie yourself to me just for protection. Who says it's just for protection? He met her eyes across the room. I'd planned to court you proper come spring. This just moves up the timeline. Court me." Her voice was faint. "But Margaret is dead," Ethan said gently but firmly. "She's been dead 3 years. I'll always love her, always grieve what we lost. But that doesn't mean my heart died with her." He crossed to Clara, took her hands. "These past weeks, you've shown me I can feel again. Laugh again, want things again. If that's not love, it's close enough to build on. You'd marry a killer? A woman hunted by her own family. I'd marry a survivor, a woman brave enough to save herself and strong enough to start over." He squeezed her hands. "The question is, would you marry a man still learning how to live again?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes. Oh, Ethan, yes." Tom cleared his throat. "Not to interrupt, but if Briggs is sniffing around Cheyenne, riding in might not be smart. Then we bring the judge here," Ethan decided. "Matthew said he owed me a favor. Time to collect. Tom, you and Jake ride to town, explain the situation. If Harrison's willing, escort him back here tomorrow. And if Briggs tries to follow," Ethan's smile was cold, "then he'll learn what happens to men who threaten what's mine." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations. Clara alternated between joy and worry, fretting about everything from the simple dress she'd wear to the larger implications of marriage. Ethan found her that evening in Margaret's room, soon to be their room, staring at the wedding photograph on the dresser. "She was beautiful," Clara said softly. "You must have been so happy." "We were." Ethan joined her, studying the familiar faces in the frame. "For 6 years, we were. But Clara, I'm not trying to replace her. What you and I have, it's different. Born from different circumstances, shaped by different experiences. But that doesn't make it less real. I know. It's just, I never thought I'd marry again. After Theodore, I couldn't imagine trusting anyone that much." She turned to face him. "But you make me feel safe in a way I'd forgotten was possible. These weeks, working beside you, building something together. It feels like home. It is home. Your home, for as long as you want it." "Forever," she said firmly. "I want forever." He kissed her then, sealing the promise. When they parted, both were breathless. "Tomorrow," he said. "After tomorrow, no one can take you away." "And if Jonathan comes anyway? If he brings an army? Then he'll face one in return. Every man on this ranch, half the town if Judge Harrison has his way. You're not alone anymore. Clara, you have people willing to fight for you." "I've never had that before," she admitted. "It's a little overwhelming. Get used to it. Comes with being a Callahan." That night, Ethan didn't sleep in the barn. Propriety be damned, if trouble was coming. He wanted Clara where he could protect her. They lay fully clothed on top of the bedding, her head on his shoulder, talking quietly about the future they were claiming despite all odds. "I want to plant a garden," Clara said. "Vegetables, but flowers too, the kind that attract butterflies." Margaret always wanted a garden, never got around to it. The mention of his late wife came easier now, natural as breathing. "There's good soil on the south side of the house, gets sun most of the day, and maybe someday, children." The question was hesitant, loaded with the pain of her losses. "If God wills it, and if not, we'll make our own family other ways. Take in orphans, maybe. Kids who need what we can offer." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "We've both lost enough. Clara, time to start building instead of mourning." Morning came too soon, bringing Tom and Jake back with Judge Harrison in tow. The judge, a dignified man in his 60s, greeted Clara with a gentle courtesy that put her at ease. "My dear, Ethan's told me something of your circumstances," he said, taking her hands. "I want you to know that in my court, justice isn't bought or sold. Whatever documents I sign today will stand against any challenge." "Briggs," Ethan asked Tom quietly. "Still in town, asking questions, but careful-like." "I don't think he knows we were there." Tom's expression was grim. "Judge says he's got legal papers from Kansas, some kind of wardship claiming Clara's not competent to manage her own affairs." After her husband's death, she became hysterical. Judge Harrison explained, disgust clear in his tone. That's what the papers claim. Family wants her back for her own good. It's nonsense, of course, but it gives them legal cover for dragging her back. Not after today, Ethan said firmly. The ceremony was simple, held in the main room with all the ranch hands as witnesses. Clara wore Margaret's wedding dress, let out and hemmed by her own careful hands. It was too fine for the setting, cream silk against rough log walls, but she made it perfect. When Judge Harrison asked if anyone objected, Pete threatened to shoot anyone who tried, drawing nervous laughter. The vows were traditional, but the emotion behind them was anything but. When Ethan promised to protect and cherish, he meant it with every fiber of his being. When Clara promised to honor and obey, her eyes added silently, and stand beside you against whatever comes, I now pronounce you man and wife. Judge Harrison intoned, what God has joined, let no man tear asunder, and that, he added with satisfaction, includes Kansas mining barons with delusions of ownership. Ethan kissed his bride as the men cheered and stomped their feet. Clara was crying and laughing at once, clinging to him as if he might vanish. But he was solid and real and hers, legally and truly. Mrs. Callahan, he murmured against her lips. How does it feel? Like freedom, she whispered back. Like finally being free. The celebration was interrupted by Samuel, who'd been on watch. Riders coming, 4 of them, armed and moving fast. The room erupted in motion. Ethan pushed Clara behind him as the men grabbed their weapons. Judge Harrison, proving why he'd survived 40 years in the territory, produced a shotgun from his wagon. Remember, Ethan called out, we're in the right here, but if they want to fight, we'll give them one. Through the window, they watched 4 men approach. The leader, presumably Briggs, was a lean man with dead eyes and a tied-down gun. His companions looked equally dangerous. They stopped just outside comfortable shooting range. Hello, the house, Briggs called. Looking for Clara Hartley. We know she's here. Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle casual in his hands. No one here by that name. Don't play games. Callahan, woman's not right in the head. Her family wants her home where she can get proper care. The only woman here is my wife, and she's exactly where she belongs. Briggs's face darkened. Your wife? Since when? Since about 10 minutes ago, Judge Harrison said, joining Ethan on the porch. I performed the ceremony myself, all legal and proper. So unless you have business with Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, I suggest you move along. This ain't over, Briggs snarled. That woman's got debts to pay. Any debts Clara had died with her first husband. Ethan said coldly, now get off my land before I forget I'm a law-abiding man. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Briggs wheeled his horse around. This ain't over, he repeated. Tell the widow, sorry. The bride, her brother-in-law sends his regards. He'll be seeing her real soon. They watched the 4 men ride away. Only when they were specks in the distance did Ethan lower his rifle. Clara emerged from the house, face pale but determined. They'll be back, she said. Let them come. Ethan pulled her against him. You're Clara Callahan now. This is your land, your home, your people. And we don't run from fights on the double C. She looked up at him, and in her eyes, he saw the fear finally starting to fade, replaced by something stronger. Hope, trust, love. No, she agreed. We don't run, not anymore. 3 days after the wedding, Jonathan Hartley himself arrived in Cheyenne. The news came from Matthew Pearson, who'd ridden hard through the pre-dawn darkness to reach the double C. His horse was lathered with sweat, sides heaving, as he gasped out his message. Private railroad car, brought 6 more men. Judge Harrison says to tell you Hartley's got a territorial judge with him from Kansas, Judge Blackwood. They're claiming jurisdiction. Ethan felt Clara's hand tighten in his. They'd been having breakfast, a quiet moment of normalcy before the day's work. Now the coffee turned bitter in his mouth. How long before they come here? He asked. Judge Harrison's trying to delay them with legal procedures, but Blackwood's pushing hard. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. Matthew accepted the water Tom offered gratefully. There's more. Hartley's spreading money around town. Lots of it. Trying to turn people against you. Let him waste his gold, Tom said with contempt. Money don't buy loyalty out here. But Ethan knew better. Money could buy a lot of things, including silence from those who might otherwise help. He looked at Clara, saw his own thoughts reflected in her pale face. I should go, she said quietly. This is my fight, not yours, not the town's. The hell it is! Ethan's voice was sharp. You're my wife. Your fights are mine now. But the ranch, the men, made their choice. Pete interrupted from the doorway. Begging your pardon for eavesdropping, but the boys are getting restless. We've been talking, and we figure it's time to remind these Kansas folks how we handle things in Wyoming. No violence unless they start it. Ethan warned. We're on the right side of the law. Let's keep it that way. Pete grinned. A wolf's expression. Course not. Boss, we're peaceable as lambs, just happen to be well-armed lambs who know the territory better than any flatland mining boss. After Matthew left to rest, Ethan called a war council, 8 ranch hands, plus himself and Clara. They gathered around the kitchen table, faces serious. They'll come here eventually. Ethan said, Question is, do we wait or meet them in town? Town's better, Tom argued. Witnesses. Judge Harrison can intervene if needed. But this is our ground. Jake countered. We know every hill, every draw. If they want to start something, Clara spoke up, surprising them all. What if I went to town, faced Jonathan directly? Absolutely not, Ethan said immediately. Hear me out. She leaned forward, a determined light in her eyes. He's counting on me hiding, being afraid. What if I'm not? What if I stand up in front of the whole town and tell them exactly what kind of man Theodore Hartley was, what kind Jonathan is? They'd kill you, Samuel said bluntly. Men like that don't tolerate defiance. Not in front of witnesses, not with Judge Harrison watching. Clara looked at Ethan. You said I'm not alone anymore. Then let me use that. Let the town see who's really the victim here. Ethan wanted to refuse, every protective instinct screaming against putting her in danger. But he saw the steel in her spine, the need to stop running. If we do this, we do it smart. Armed escort, men in position around town. First sign of trouble, we get you out. Agreed. Clara's smile was sharp as a blade. Time to show Jonathan he's not in Kansas anymore. They rode out at noon, Ethan and Clara in the wagon, surrounded by his men. Those who saw them pass later said it looked like a military convoy, hard-faced riders bristling with weapons. The message was clear. Clara Callahan was under protection. Cheyenne's main street was busier than usual. Word of the confrontation having spread, people lined the boardwalks, some curious, others concerned. Judge Harrison met them at his office, face grave. Hartley's holding court at the Grand Hotel. He reported. Blackwood's with him, along with that snake Briggs. They're demanding you turn over Clara for her own welfare. Claims she's mentally unstable, prone to violence. The only violence I'm prone to is defending myself, Clara said coldly. I know that, my dear. But Blackwood's brought affidavits, sworn statements from Kansas saying you attacked your husband unprovoked, that you've made threats against the family. Harrison's expression was disgusted. Bought and paid for lies, but official looking. Then we'll give them truth. Ethan decided. Public hearing. Let Clara tell her side. That's dangerous. Blackwood could rule against her, order her returned to Kansas custody, and I could put a bullet in him if he tries. Tom muttered. At Harrison's sharp look, he added. Hypothetically speaking. No, Clara's right. They're counting on shadows and fear. Time to bring everything into the light. Ethan looked at his wife. You sure about this? I've been sure since the day I ran. Just took me this long to find the courage. The Grand Hotel's dining room had been cleared for the impromptu hearing. Jonathan Hartley sat at the head table like a king. flanked by Judge Blackwood and his hired men. He was younger than his brother had been, but with the same cold eyes and cruel mouth. When Clara entered, his expression darkened with fury. "There she is," he announced to the packed room. "My poor sister-in-law, so confused and broken by her tragic loss. Clara, dear, come home. We only want to help you. The way you helped when you locked me in the root cellar." Clara's voice carried clearly, or the way Theodore helped when he pushed me down the stairs. A murmur ran through the crowd. Jonathan's face reddened. See how she lies? The poor woman's delusions. Are they delusions? Clara stepped forward, Ethan close beside her. Should I show them the scars? Jonathan? Tell them about the 3 babies I lost because your brother couldn't control his temper? About the night he finally went too far. You killed him! Jonathan burst out. Murdered him in cold blood! I defended myself against a man who'd sworn to kill me and the child I carried. Clara's voice never wavered. Yes, I killed Theodore, and given the same circumstances, I'd do it again. The room erupted. Judge Blackwood pounded his gavel, a presumptuous gesture in a town where he had no authority. This woman has confessed to murder. She must be returned to Kansas to face justice. The only justice she'll face there is a shallow grave. Judge Harrison interjected. This is Wyoming territory. Blackwood, your bought authority means nothing here. She's a Hartley by marriage. That makes her our responsibility. She was a Hartley, Ethan corrected. Now she's a Callahan, and we take care of our own. Jonathan stood, rage distorting his features. You think marrying this murderer protects her? I own half of Kansas. I have influence, money, things that matter back home. Someone called from the crowd. Ethan recognized Will Carson, owner of the general store. But out here, we judge folks by their character. And from where I sit, Mrs. Callahan's got more courage than all you Kansas boys combined. Other voices rose in agreement. The tide was turning, town solidarity asserting itself against outside interference. But Jonathan wasn't finished. Briggs, he snapped. Take her. The gunman's hand moved toward his weapon, but froze as the distinctive sound of multiple hammers cocking filled the room. Tom, Jake, Samuel, and the others had spread through the crowd, and now each had iron trained on Hartley's men. I'd think real careful about your next move, Ethan said softly. You're outnumbered and outgunned. More importantly, you're wrong. You can't threaten a territorial judge, Blackwood blustered. No threat intended, Judge Harrison said mildly. But you should know that I've wired the federal marshal in Denver about your interesting interpretation of jurisdiction. He's very curious about a Kansas judge trying to enforce Kansas law in Wyoming. Should be here in, 3 days? Jonathan's face went pale. Federal involvement was the last thing he wanted. Too many questions about his business practices, his brother's death, the circumstances that drove Clara to desperation. This isn't over, he snarled at Clara. You're a stain on the Hartley name. That demands answer. Then answer it yourself. Clara challenged. Face me directly instead of hiding behind hired guns and corrupt judges. Or are you the coward I think you are? The insult hung in the air. Jonathan's hand twitched toward his pocket pistol, but Ethan was already moving. His fist connected with the mining baron's jaw, sending him sprawling. You want satisfaction? Ethan stood over the fallen man. Then call me out proper. Tomorrow, dawn, outside town. We'll settle this like men. Ethan, no! Clara gasped, but Jonathan was already nodding, blood streaming from his split lip. Done. When I kill you, your widow becomes my responsibility again. And when I kill you, your claims die with you. Ethan helped Clara from the room, leaving Jonathan to his rage and humiliation. Outside, Clara turned on him. You can't fight him. I won't have your blood on my hands too. You won't. Ethan caught her shoulders gently. Trust me, Clara. This ends tomorrow, one way or another. But if something happens to you, it won't. He pulled her close, feeling her tremble. I've got too much to live for now. But men like Jonathan only understand force. He'll keep coming unless we stop him definitively. That night, They held each other in their hotel room, not making love but memorizing each touch, each breath. Clara traced the lines of his face as if trying to burn them into memory. "I've brought you nothing but trouble," she whispered. "You've brought me back to life," he corrected. "Whatever happens tomorrow, these weeks with you have been worth everything. Don't talk like that. Don't you dare say goodbye. I'm saying hello to the rest of our lives." He kissed her deeply. Jonathan Hartley is a bully and a coward. He's never faced a man who wasn't afraid of him. Tomorrow, he will. Dawn came cold and clear, frost glittering on the grass outside town. Half of Cheyenne had turned out to witness the duel. Despite Judge Harrison's official disapproval, Jonathan stood with Briggs and his other men, trying to project confidence. But Ethan saw the tremor in his hands, the sweat despite the chill. "Terms?" Judge Harrison asked, acting as reluctant referee. "Pistols at 20 paces. Jonathan declared. "To the death. So be it." Harrison looked disgusted. "Though I'll note for the record this is illegal and ill-advised." Clara stood with the ranch hands, her face pale but composed. She dressed in her wedding dress, a statement of whom she belonged to. When Ethan met her eyes, she nodded once. Trust, faith, love. The two men stood back to back. Harrison counted off the paces. At 20, they turned. Jonathan fired first. Too eager, too angry. The shot went wide, splintering a fence post. Ethan took his time, arm steady, remembering every bruise on Clara's wrists, every shadow in her eyes. "You have your shot, Callahan," Harrison called. "Take it or forfeit." Ethan aimed carefully. Jonathan's face went white, realizing his mistake. At this range, Ethan couldn't miss. The shot was perfect, blowing Jonathan's gun from his hand, taking 2 fingers with it. The man screamed, dropping to his knees, cradling his maimed hand. "I could have killed you," Ethan said, walking closer. "Should have, probably. But Clara's seen enough death. So you're going to live, Jonathan. Live knowing you faced a better man and lost. Live knowing she's beyond your reach forever." "My hand," Jonathan sobbed. "You've ruined me." "No. You ruined yourself the day you decided to own another person." Ethan looked at Briggs and the others. "Take him back to Kansas. Tell anyone else who's interested that Clara Callahan is under my protection. Anyone who threatens her threatens me." Briggs nodded slowly, recognizing the shift in power. He helped Jonathan to his feet, the mining baron still whimpering over his maimed hand. Within an hour, they were gone, Blackwood with them, tails between their legs. Clara flew into Ethan's arms, tears streaming. "You could have killed him. Why didn't you?" "Because you're not a widow anymore," he said simply. "You're my wife, and that means choosing mercy when we can." He tilted her chin up. "It's over. Clara, you're free." She kissed him there in front of the whole town. Propriety be damned. When they parted, Judge Harrison was smiling. "Well, that's that sorted. Though next time you want to defend your wife's honor, Callahan, try to do it legally." "No next time," Ethan promised. "We're done with the past. Only the future matters now." They returned to the Double C that afternoon. Clara riding in front of Ethan on his horse, his arms secure around her. The men cheered when they saw them, and Pete had prepared a feast in celebration. That night, truly alone for the first time as husband and wife without threats hanging over them, they came together with desperate passion. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a vow. When Clara cried out his name in the darkness, Ethan knew he'd found something he'd thought lost forever, not a replacement for what was gone, but something new and fierce and utterly theirs. "No more looking back," Clara whispered against his chest afterward. "No more running, just us, here, building something together." "Just us," he agreed, holding her close. Outside, spring was coming to Wyoming, bringing new life to the land. Inside, 2 damaged souls had found healing in each other, proving that sometimes the best revenge against a cruel past was simply choosing to be happy despite it. The Hartley name never darkened their door again. Jonathan's influence died with his gun hand, and the story of his humiliation spread through the territories. Clara planted her garden that spring, and by summer it bloomed with flowers that attracted butterflies from miles around. The Double C prospered, and if the laughter that rang from the main house sounded like redemption, well, perhaps it was. Spring transformed the Double C Ranch into a paradise of green meadows and wildflowers. The snow was a memory now, replaced by warm breezes that carried the scent of new grass and possibility. Clara stood at the porch rail, one hand resting on her still flat stomach, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. 6 weeks had passed since Jonathan Hartley's defeat. 6 weeks of peace, of building, of discovering what life could be when fear no longer shadowed every moment. The ranch thrived under their combined care, Ethan's experience and Clara's gentle efficiency creating a harmony that affected everything from the livestock to the morale of the hands. "You're up early," Ethan said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. He'd learned to move quietly, not wanting to startle her, though the need for such caution was fading. "I wanted to watch the dawn." She accepted the coffee gratefully, then set it aside. "Actually, coffee's been making me queasy lately." Ethan's hand stilled on his cup. "Clara?" She turned to him, eyes bright with tears and joy. "I saw Doc Morrison yesterday when he came to check on Tom's hand. I'm about 2 months along, due in autumn." The cup slipped from Ethan's nerveless fingers, shattering on the porch boards. He didn't notice, too busy pulling Clara into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "You're sure?" "Very sure." She laughed against his chest. "I was terrified to hope after before, but Doc says everything looks good. Strong heartbeat. I'm healthy." Ethan pulled back to study her face, his own eyes suspiciously wet. "A baby. Our baby. Are you happy?" The question held echoes of old fears, memories of a husband who'd seen children as possessions rather than blessings. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He knelt suddenly, pressing his ear to her stomach as if he could hear that tiny heartbeat. "Hello, little one. I'm your papa, and I promise you'll be loved every day of your life." Clara's fingers threaded through his hair, and for a moment they stayed frozen in that tableau of hope and promise. Then Pete's voice broke the spell. "Boss, we got visitors coming." Ethan rose, hand going automatically to his sidearm. But as the small group approached, he relaxed. A woman drove the wagon, flanked by 2 young boys on ponies. Behind them rode Father Miguel from the Catholic mission in town. The woman was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair and tired eyes. The boys, twins by the look of them, couldn't have been more than 8. All 3 were thin, travel-worn, their clothes mended many times over. "Mr. Callahan?" The woman's voice was soft, accented. "I am Rosa Delgado. Father Miguel, he say you might have work?" Ethan glanced at Clara, who was already moving forward with her welcoming smile. "What kind of work are you looking for, Mrs. Delgado?" "Anything, everything." Rosa's dignity never wavered despite her obvious desperation. "I cook, clean, sew. My boys, they are good with horses, cattle. We work hard, cause no trouble." "Your husband?" Clara asked gently. "Dead. The fever took him last winter." Rosa lifted her chin. "We have no family here, nowhere to go. But we are not beggars. We work for our keep." Father Miguel dismounted, his weathered face kind. "The Delgados came to the mission seeking sanctuary, but we have so many in need. I remembered you mentioning perhaps taking in help for the house, Mrs. Callahan." Clara and Ethan exchanged glances, a whole conversation in a look. The ranch was prospering. They could use the help, and those boys looked like they hadn't had a proper meal in weeks. "Pete's been complaining about needing an assistant in the kitchen," Clara said, "and we're about to expand the herd. Could use extra hands. The foreman's cabin is empty if you need a place to stay." Hope flickered in Rosa's eyes. "We would be grateful. My boys, Carlos and Miguel. They learn quick. They will not disappoint." "Why don't you get settled in?" Ethan suggested. "Clara can show you the cabin, introduce you to the hands. We'll work out the particulars over supper." As the women walked away, the twins trailing behind with wide eyes, Father Miguel lingered. "You do a good thing, my friend. They have suffered much. Seems to be our specialty," Ethan said wryly. "Taking in strays. The best families often are." The priest's eyes twinkled. "I hear congratulations are in order. Judge Harrison mentioned your recent nuptials. News travels fast. Good news always does, and perhaps more good news to come?" At Ethan's surprised look, Father Miguel chuckled. "Clara has the glow of a woman with secrets. Happy secrets. You don't miss much, Father. It's my job to see God's blessings, and you, my friend, have been much blessed." He mounted his horse. "Take care of the Delgados. They have hearts worthy of trust." The twins integrated into ranch life as if born to it. Within days, they were following Jake and Samuel around, soaking up knowledge about horses and cattle with the enthusiasm of children who'd found their calling. Rosa proved to be not just a good cook, but an excellent manager, organizing the household with quiet efficiency that complemented Clara's style perfectly. One evening, as they all gathered for supper, a new tradition that included the Delgados, Clara noticed one of the twins, Miguel, sitting apart, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "What are you drawing?" she asked, settling beside him. "The mountains," he said shyly. "Papa used to paint them before," he trailed off. "Your father was an artist?" Rosa overheard, her face softening with memory. "He painted portraits in Mexico City, but the war came and we had to leave. He tried farming, mining, anything to feed us. The art, it died with him." Clara studied the boy's crude sketch, seeing real talent in the lines. "Ethan, didn't Margaret have art supplies stored somewhere?" "In the attic. Paints, brushes, canvas." He'd avoided that particular box. Too many memories. But looking at the boy's hungry eyes, he nodded. "I'll fetch them after supper." Miguel's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? I could paint." "Everyone needs beauty in their life." Clara said, "Maybe you can paint the ranch. Show people what we're building here." That night, as they prepared for bed, Ethan pulled Clara close. "You have a gift for healing broken things. Takes one to know one." She murmured against his chest. "We're building something good here, aren't we? Not just a ranch, but a home for people who need it. A family," he agreed. "Though soon enough we'll have our own addition to worry about." Clara's hand went to her stomach. "I've been thinking about names. If it's a boy, I'd like to call him James, after my father. Help redeem the name. Give it a fresh start. And if it's a girl, Margaret." She felt him stiffen, hurried on. Not as replacement, but as honor. She made this house a home first. It seems right to remember that. Ethan was quiet for long moments. "She would have liked you," he said finally. "Would have admired your strength." "I hope so. I talk to her sometimes, when I'm in the garden. Thank her for loving you first, for making you the man who could love me." Clara tilted her head up. "Is that strange? No stranger than me asking her to watch over you when I'm away." He kissed her softly. "We're a peculiar family. Clara Callahan. Ghosts and all." Summer brought prosperity and challenge in equal measure. The expanded herd thrived, bringing in better profits than expected. Clara's garden bloomed magnificently, and her pregnancy progressed without complication. Miguel painted constantly, his talent blossoming under encouragement, while Carlos showed a gift for working with horses that impressed even Tom. But one hot July afternoon, the past made one final attempt to disturb their peace. Clara was in the garden when she saw the rider approaching. Something in his posture, the way he sat his horse, sent ice through her veins. She knew him before she could see his face. Theodore's cousin, William Hartley. "Ethan!" she called, but her husband was already moving, having spotted the stranger from the barn. William Hartley was younger than his cousins, perhaps 30, with a softer look about him. He dismounted slowly, hands visible, no threat in his posture. "Clara," he said simply. "Mr. Callahan, I come in peace. State your business and be gone," Ethan said coldly. I've come to apologize. The words seemed to surprise William as much as them. And to bring news. Jonathan is dead. Shot himself last month. Couldn't live with the shame, the useless hand. Clara felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sorrow. Just emptiness where Jonathan was concerned. Why tell us? Because with Theodore and Jonathan gone, I inherit everything. The mines, the money, the family legacy. William's face twisted. A legacy built on cruelty and blood. I've seen the books. Know what they did. To workers, to you, to anyone who stood in their way. He reached into his coat, slowly, pulling out a leather folder. This is a legal document renouncing any claim the Hartley family has on you. Clara, past, present, or future. You're free, truly and completely. I was already free. Clara said quietly, Your paper changes nothing. No, but perhaps this will. He pulled out another document. Compensation. For what you suffered. What you lost. It can't buy back the years of the children. But maybe it can build something better. Ethan examined the bank draft, eyebrows rising at the amount. This is a fortune. Blood money, William said bluntly. The least the Hartley name owes her. I'm closing the mines, selling the holdings, going back east, starting fresh where the name means nothing. This is cleaning the slate. Clara stared at the documents, then at the man who'd ridden so far to deliver them. Why? Because someone needs to break the chain. William's eyes were haunted. I have a daughter now, 2 years old. When I look at her, I think about what kind of man I want to be, what kind of world I want to leave her. The Hartley men have been monsters for generations. Maybe it's time for something different. And you think money absolves that? No, but it's a start. He mounted his horse. Use it well. Clara, build something good. Let there be one corner of the world where the Hartley name brought blessing instead of curse. He rode away without waiting for response, leaving them staring at documents that represented more money than most saw in a lifetime. What do you want to do? Ethan asked finally. Clara looked around, at the ranch, the garden, Rosa hanging laundry while the boys played, Tom and the hands working with the horses. Her hand rested on her growing belly. I want to build a school, she said suddenly. For the ranch children, the town children, a place where they can learn to read, write, paint. She smiled at her husband. Where they can become more than their circumstances. The Clara Callahan School? Ethan teased. The Second Chances School, she corrected. For all of us who needed one. That evening, they called everyone together to share the news. The money would go toward the school, improvements to the ranch, and trust funds for any children who came to live there. The Double C would become more than a ranch. It would be a haven. To second chances. Tom raised his glass in a toast. And the people brave enough to take them. To family, Rosa added. Her boys pressed close to her sides. The kind you choose. To home, Pete grumbled, trying to hide his emotion. The place that takes you in, no matter what. Clara stood, Ethan's hand in hers, the other resting where their child grew. To survival, she said quietly, and to the life that comes after. They drank, a mismatched family bound by choice rather than blood, by hope rather than history. Outside, the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise. Later, as Ethan and Clara walked the perimeter of their land, she paused where the garden met the wild grassland. I used to think happiness was something I'd lost forever, she said, that some sins couldn't be forgiven, some wounds couldn't heal. And now, she turned in his arms, her smile radiant in the twilight. Now I think maybe the cracks are where the light gets in. All that pain, all that loss, it led me here, to you, to this, to us. Ethan agreed, pulling her close. They stood together as darkness fell, no longer looking back at the shadows they'd escaped, but forward to the dawn they'd build together. The Double C Ranch spread around them, more than land and cattle now. It was hope made manifest, proof that broken people could create something whole. In the distance, a wolf howled, But it held no terror now. They were home, they were safe, and they were together. The rest, as Clara often said, was just beginning. Emgi, minda song sot that surua. Clara whispered in the language she'd been teaching Ethan, the words of her mother's people. Kong pai song sot. He replied carefully in the same tongue. Mala bat dao song. Not just survival, but beginning to live, and in the growing darkness, with their unborn child between them and their chosen family nearby. That's exactly what they did. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this journey through the untamed heart of the Old West. If you're listening to this story, we'd love to hear where in the world you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more tales of love, redemption, and courage from the frontier. What did Clara and Ethan's story mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights make our campfire circle complete.